Crazy problems sometimes require even crazier solutions. When I first talked about the Ravens offense 3 weeks ago on this channel, I'll admit that I was wrong about some things. I was wrong that Baltimore would lose to the Chargers on the road, I was wrong to say that they wouldn't completely run over Cleveland in Week 17, and I was wrong for thinking that Lamar Jackson would be forced to carry this team to the playoffs as a passer instead of as a runner. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. There were plenty of things that I was off on, just like there were plenty of things that I feel like I got right in the end. But do you know where I really missed the most out of all of those predictions from a few weeks ago? I never thought about defensive coordinators matching Baltimore's unpredictability with even more unpredictability of their own. I never accounted for one of the core rules of coaching football, and perhaps the most important rule to any coach that finds themselves facing a team that just kicked their ass less than a month ago. To beat crazy, you've got to be crazy. But to go one step further and dominate crazy, you've got to be totally batshit insane. Playoff football is always reliable for showing me at least one crazy new thing every January that will echo into the following season and beyond. Whether it's a new breed of multi-dimensional quarterbacks, or a single run establishing the identity of an entire franchise, or a backup journeyman transforming into a legend overnight. But to see the Chargers not just slow down, but absolutely demolish the deadliest rushing attack we've seen in years with 7 defensive backs on the field, yeah, that one's a whole new level of absurdity, even by playoff standards. I couldn't believe what I was watching at the time, so naturally after seeing whatever the hell that game was, I wanted to take a deep dive into the tape this week to figure out just how the lightest defense I have ever seen in my life somehow just shut down one of the most productive rushing attacks I have ever seen in my life. And to my complete surprise, despite having radically different personnel on the field than I imagined in the first place, the Chargers actually used literally the exact same game plan that I laid out on this channel just a few weeks ago. And if you've not seen that episode, I'll link it down below so you can kind of refresh yourself on the concept, but if you have seen it, you'll recognize these diagrams immediately. There's gap exchanges on the edges, spill, fill, and force rolls covering all of the possible running lanes, everyone focusing on doing their individual jobs rather than getting caught up with eye candy and motions all over the backfield. It's the exact same plan I had, but kicked up several notches because unlike me, Gus Bradley has the balls to run this kind of risky, all-or-nothing game plan with 0 linebackers on the field. Like, I cannot express how insane that decision was because of how little room for error it left along the defensive line, but I'll be damned if it didn't work out perfectly. The keys to it all operating smoothly, just as I said 3 weeks ago, were the edge defenders doing their jobs, specifically Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram. I'll use this third and short from early in the second quarter as an example. The Ravens have 2 yards to go to move the chains, and in every game leading up to this one, 2 yards were pretty much automatic for this offense every time they ran the ball. But not against LA. Look at how they're using this defensive line. You've got Joey Bosa bumped inside to a 5-eye technique so he can stack on this offensive tackle and hold his B-gap, and sometimes he was even at a 4 or a 3 technique just to make that even easier. You've got a cock nose sitting over the top of the center, and his one job is to penetrate the strong side A-gap and disrupt blocking angles. You've got a 3 technique on the other side whose one job is to penetrate the weak side B-gap and hold up double teams. And finally, you've got Ingram, who was in a 2-point stance basically the whole game as a rush linebacker off the edge. Everything is very condensed down inside the tackle box. They're putting all 4 of their larger bodies in a position to clog lanes against the interior run game, and they're relying on their defensive backs to handle anything else that gets spilled to the edges. It's similar to a lot of college defenses you see in the Big 12 or other conferences that typically use lighter personnel. It's size against size where you can, and speed against speed where you can. And to be honest, I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen more teams in the NFL do something like this before, because it makes a lot of sense. Baltimore is running a power lead out of the pistol here, which is a concept as old as dirt, but unlike a lot of other defenses that will run their edge defenders a bit upfield to take on the lead block and set a hard edge while the linebackers fill inside, look at how Melvin Ingram is playing it. He's immediately shooting inside. He's the one clogging up that lead block and spilling the play back out to the edge. And while doing so, he's trusting these safeties, converted to linebackers, to exchange gaps with him on time to cover his ass. You don't normally see that in a lot of systems because many teams don't trust their DBs to take on blocks and play force responsibilities when it's do or die out in space, but the Chargers do, and it worked beautifully. And I think that the aspect to this size on size, speed on speed game plan that I did not recognize or appreciate enough on first viewing is how these gap exchanges really screw with bigger running backs. It's easy to say, oh, well, this kind of game plan won't work more than once because teams will just run downhill right at these safeties and pick up easy yards through contact, but that's the thing. The Chargers' defensive line did not let the Ravens run downhill to expose these DBs. They never let Gus Edwards or Kenneth Dixon run in a straight line where they can bring all of their power to bear. They knifed inside, they messed up all the interior blocking angles, and they forced the runners to consistently bounce out. And when you have to stop, start, and bounce to the edge, all of a sudden it changes the angle of the collision and the force behind it. It changes the momentum of the runner, and if you're no longer catching a safety at full speed and running directly through his ribcage, and instead he's taking you on from the side and wrapping up your legs, guess what? You're not just going to run him over anymore. This, to me, might be the most brilliant part of this whole philosophy. You sacrifice your entire defensive line by shooting them inside on early downs to take away the interior run game, where your safeties are typically the weakest tacklers, and instead you task those DBs only with taking away the edge run game, where they are stronger tacklers. That exchange limits their exposure to getting run over, and it removes their responsibility to take on pulling guards like a typical linebacker would do. So again, it matches size with size and speed with speed. It's brilliant, and the fact that this worked against a notorious downhill run game makes me think that we could see this used against more teams that are not the Ravens, namely the Patriots this weekend. If you can stop power lead with this, which every team including New England runs in one form or another, who's to say that you can't stop everything else by doing it too? In this game alone, we saw Ingram's crashes inside disrupt zone blocking angles, lead blocking angles on power, and on some plays they just didn't block him at all and he got a forced fumble out of it. So why can't this work against more teams than just Baltimore? Part of me thinks that it might, so keep an eye on this when you're seeing the Patriots take it on this weekend, because I think that we are going to see it again. But anyway, I digress, back to the Ravens. One of the main points of my breakdown of this Baltimore offense 3 weeks ago was not just that crashing the ends inside could ruin their run game, but also that once their run game did get ruined, that they would have to rely on Lamar Jackson as a passer to dig them out of that hole. And more than anything, I wondered and hoped that he would be ready when that time inevitably came, which it finally did last Sunday. Obviously the numbers were ugly, and obviously no 21-year-old rookie quarterback is ever going to be a finished product, but how much of Lamar's struggles as a passer were on him, how much were on his offensive line, and how much were on offensive coordinator Marty Mornhinweg? That was the question that I sought to answer the most when reviewing this game, and, well, truth be told, a lot more went wrong with Jackson than people might want to hear. Did Marty call a perfect game? No. But he definitely put Lamar in a position to succeed, and unfortunately for the Ravens, he just didn't. Whether it was putting easy passes in the dirt while he was rolling out in space, which should have gone for first downs to extend drives, or pulling the trigger too early on his first reads rather than waiting for a receiver to clear a second window for a big gain, or pulling the trigger too late and not throwing a deep comeback on time against a bail technique corner in cover 3, which, truth be told, is one of the most essential throws for any quarterback to have under their belt if they want to beat teams that run cover 3. You know, just a lot of his day as a passer was ugly, and it wasn't all mechanics and it wasn't all mental, but rather a very disheartening mix of both. And I think the play where I really got frustrated the most, because I feel like Marty dialed up a perfect play call to help out his young quarterback, was this incompletion early in the fourth quarter, which led to yet another stalled drive. It's 2nd and 11, Baltimore's down by 17 points, and they really need a big play here to try to get this game back on track. Mornhinweg calls for a double seam concept from a 2x2 look, which is absolutely perfect in this scenario because the Chargers had only run cover 3 the entire day. And I'm not exaggerating about that either, it was literally the only coverage they showed up to this point. And double seam is one of the easiest and most reliable ways to rip off a big chunk of yardage against cover 3. Before the snap, you can even see this high safety all the way on the opposite hash from the ball, so there is a huge swath of green grass here just waiting to be exploited. And to make it even easier, once Lamar hits that third step in his drop, there's really only one read that he actually needs to make. He's got to keep his eyes locked in the middle of the field and just peek at Mark Andrews running up that seam, because that's going to determine where he throws that ball. Not if he throws it, mind you, I'm talking where he throws it, because usually seam routes are just that automatic against this coverage. If this hook zone defender is turning and running with him right on his inside hip with his back turned to the throw, you put that ball high and on Andrews' back shoulder just like it was any other back shoulder fade. It's a completely indefensible throw if you can place it correctly. If the hook zone defender does not have his back turned and instead he's peeking in the backfield and taking a flatter angle in coverage, just like you see he is here, you throw that ball skinny and out in front of Andrews to set him up for a few extra yards after the catch before the high safety can get over there and tackle him. However, if the hook zone defender is not covering him at all, and instead you see the flat defender, which is Derwin James in this instance, carrying him up the seam with outside leverage, congratulations, you've got Kenneth Dixon in the flat with 15 yards of space between him and the nearest Charger. This is a 100% slam dunk play call any way you slice it, and it was only determined by one read after the snap against the only coverage they had seen all day, and yet somehow it still got blown up and Lamar had to run for his life before throwing an incompletion. And I know what you're thinking, Brett, why are you blaming Jackson for this? His line got beat, he had to run, and you're being really unfair. But no, this was pretty clearly Jackson's fault to me because he's the one that allowed the pressure to be a factor in the first place. Look at this footwork in his drop here. This is supposed to be a 3-step drop from the gun and get the ball out kind of play, especially against a pass rush that features Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram. But Lamar turns his third step into 3 more mini steps of their own just so he can show some pointless pump fake to Dixon in the flat. He's not looking down the middle of the field, he's not reading that seam route to see where he needs to place it, but most importantly, he's not giving himself time to throw off a quick drop in the first place. You don't have time to throw a pump fake in there at the end of a drop against this pass rush, and these windows against zone coverage are not going to be open forever with 7 DBs on the field. This play is designed and timed around a 3-step drop and a single read to the seam. So as someone who was empathizing with Marty Morningwig as a play caller, all I wanted for Lamar to do was just get through his drop quickly and read the f***ing seam. Nobody was carrying Andrews in coverage down the field, and even if they were, he could just throw it back shoulder and take the free 20 yards. Jackson made this way more complicated than it needed to be, and by the time he actually did put his eyes down the middle and come up ready to read that coverage, the rush was already there. Would he likely have gotten hit no matter what on this play? Probably yeah, but at least if he kept his drop short and read the coverage from the start, he would have gotten the ball out first to an open receiver before he got hit. Instead, he had to break 2 tackles, roll out to his left, and throw a low ball to Snead, which he couldn't bring in, and it fell incomplete. On the very next play, he took an 8-yard sack, and the drive was over. LA then took 5 more minutes off the clock on their next possession when Baltimore was already down by 3 scores. I get that Lamar's protection wasn't great, and he doesn't have a true number 1 receiver, and his run game got shut down, but I'll tell you what, despite all of those hardships, Jackson made it even harder on himself than all of that other stuff combined. I know he's young, and I know he'll get better over time, but there's really no other way for me to say this. This was a terrible performance, and it's the kind of performance that I was really afraid of when I broke down this offense less than a month ago. My comments about the Ravens' expiration date weren't just about their run game, they were about the expiration date of Lamar Jackson's safety nets. And now that the Chargers put this blueprint out there on tape, I'm not sure that those safety nets are ever coming back. Obviously, by this time next year, things could change, and we could see an entirely new version of Jackson that moves through progressions quickly and makes accurate throws on time and elevates his team to a level above what they are now. But as of last Sunday, I just haven't seen that yet. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that Jackson ends up being the answer that Ravens fans have been looking for, but I refuse to ignore red flags. I wouldn't be doing my job if I ignored red flags, and believe me, that game was nothing but red flags. It was sheer craziness outwitted by utter insanity, and quite frankly, I still don't really know what to make of it for either team. The only thing that I am sure of is that we have not seen the last ripple effect to come out of this matchup. The Ravens invented an entirely new offense for 2 months, and the Chargers invented an entirely new defense for 1 week just to stop it. I don't know how these schemes will affect the 2019 season at this point, but like so many other iconic January battles before, I get the feeling that it will. So keep one eye on these ridiculous defensive personnel packages in the future, and keep your other eye on how the Ravens rebuild their offense from scratch this summer to match them. Because somehow, someway, this game is going to lead to something big next year. We just don't really know what it is yet. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode, and thank you to Gus Bradley for maybe giving me a couple extra episodes worth of material in the future, because I feel like a lot of teams are going to be inspired by what he did last week and the defense he designed, but obviously those are going to be topics for another day. For the here and now, if you feel like there's something a little bit special about this Chargers team, just like I do, and if you feel like putting a little bit of money down on them to cover that 4-point spread up in Foxborough, if that's teasing you like it's teasing me, head on down to that link in the description below to MyBookie, because right now all Film Room viewers can get up to a 50% sign-up bonus with promo code Brett on MyBookie, which means an extra 50% of whatever your deposit is, up to $1,000, as free betting credits on the site to use on whatever bet you want to use them on. It doesn't even have to be NFL. It can be NBA, Major League Baseball, esports, combat sports, racing. I mean, they have literally everything, and you can use those credits on anything you want. So, for instance, I had $50 in free betting credits left over in week 17. I put that $50 bet for free down on the Colts to beat Tennessee, which of course they did, and that gave me $40 back in actual cash in my account that's still there. I haven't even used it yet, that I had no risk of ever losing. It's just house money that gave me real money. So it's a really awesome offer, and if you guys were planning on betting on some of these games anyway, check out that link in the description below, enter promo code Brett, and get a little bit of extra out of your bets this weekend. As for me, I will of course be back next week to analyze one of the conference championship matchups. I'm not sure which one yet, obviously, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And I'll have more picks against the spread next week as well for those two games, so stay tuned for those. Thank you all for your support, for the likes and the subscriptions and the bell clicks and all that. It really does help to keep this channel running and growing, and I really, really appreciate it. So thank you all again. I'll see you all next week, and later.